Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. On the afternoon of January 10th, I began to feel strange, as if I had eaten something bad. That night, I came home and went straight to bed. I went to work on Thursday, and by the afternoon, I had a stomach ache and thought I had a virus. That night, I returned home and went straight to bed, approximately 12:30 a.m. I awoke with a sharp pain in my stomach, as if someone had stabbed me. It wouldn't go away. When I tried to call someone I knew, I got an answering machine. I waited in agony until I reached my neighbor around 7 a.m. I had her drive me to the nearest urgent care facility, hoping that if it was serious enough to warrant an ER visit, I could avoid the wait associated with a doctor's referral. When I arrived, they saw me right away, much to the chagrin of the other patients, and gave me a direct admit to the nearest hospital and called them to let them know I was coming. I arrived at the hospital a few minutes later, but it took nearly 8 hours before I saw anyone. Meanwhile, I kept calling work for updates and became increasingly disorganized. The ER determined that I had Crohn's disease, which I knew was incorrect, and an inflamed appendix, which required routine surgery and would have me out by Monday. When the surgeon arrived, it was discovered that I not only had appendicitis, which, according to the doctor, probably went away on Wednesday afternoon, but also a ruptured ileum, which the doctor later said probably was the sharp pain I was feeling starting the previous night. Pus rose to the level of my liver. I eventually recovered, much to the doctor's surprise, but I never told him about the NDE I had during this time. I figured he'd think I'd gone insane and inject me with antipsychotics. I went through this in several steps over the next few days. I slipped away at some point during the ER wait. It began with a darkened area, which was not a void, that resembled a roadway with various colored streaks and sparks. I felt like I was on one of those airport-level moving vehicles. Then I found myself in a desert-like setting, watching a stream of people make their way toward the building. I knew what had happened at that point and went to the building. It resembled a cross between an old 19th century church and a barn. There were people there, none of whom I recognized, as well as some small animals. No one would talk to me because they were preoccupied with something else. I eventually found a badger who would converse with me. I stayed for a long time, but he assured me that I would eventually get where I needed to go. I went outside and it was very bright, but I didn't need to make any adjustments for discomfort. There were several roads and large animals. When I returned inside, I was greeted by an unfamiliar man who told me, "You don't belong here." I was expelled. I went to another location that was similar to this plane in terms of neutrality. I was aware that I was supposed to attend a class or learn something. My experience lasted about a week, despite the fact that I had only been here for a few hours. I had just awoken from surgery at this point. I had the mentality of knowing I was going to die and being fine with it. I eventually returned to the experience and found myself in a class with several other beings. We were each given a tool, each with a unique function. They were also in groups of 3, except from mine, which was just one being and me. The class took 4 months to complete. Half of it was spent learning how to use this tool and other related matters. The second half was spent going out in the field with my lab partner using our tool. I then went to his house and we constructed some sort of healing structure. His tool constructed the construct, and mine healed it. Experiential time was approximately 6 months, which is equivalent to 2 or 3 days here. I awoke to find at least 2 people and possibly a third out of my immediate vision beside my bed. The nurse was flicking the air out of a large needle. I was completely disoriented. When I asked, "What are you doing?" The doctor jumped back. He said something like, "It took us a long time and a lot of effort to wake you up." He asked me to move this, that, and the other thing before asking me questions and pressuring me to respond. For the next few minutes, he examined me. I'm not sure when it happened in the hospital, but I met the lady of the veil who put her left hand beneath my neck and her right hand on my belly, and I passed out. After that, I went into a place that looked like rolling hills of memory foam grass with little flowers all over it. Some entity, unlike any I'd ever seen, was embracing me. Complete acceptance and unconditional love. For the next 2 months, I interacted with this entity. This was clearly a place only the truly dead could go, and I had concluded that I would not be returning. I knew the last place I went was past any barrier to returning, but something or someone made an exception. Obviously, I returned at some point. I noticed that my life cord, a pagan term for the connection between your immortal essence and your body, had changed or was missing, and that I wasn't quite back on some level. This has not changed. In fact, it has become more intense. This, however, is only the tip of the iceberg. I had 8 months of the experience while only being here for 8 days. I had never believed in a higher power before, though it is not required in paganism. I thought the gods were mentors and elders rather than gods in the traditional sense, but when you're embraced by this higher power, belief is not an issue. Experience cannot be argued with. A rather amusing epilogue is that I was transferred to a different program at work a week before this occurred. This is fairly common. In this case, there were no people who held both positions. After that, I had the NDE. 6 months later, performance reviews arrived. My boss received reviews from both of his bosses, and they did not match. It was like reading a review of 2 different people. When they met with me, they argued the entire time, each accusing the other of being completely wrong in their assessment. It reached the center manager, a level of management 3 or 4 levels above these 2, who labeled it a discontinuity and attempted to make sense of it. I said nothing in response to the evaluation. The later manager was far superior to the earlier one. Story number 2. Love one another and learn. Thursday, August 2, 2007, at 1342. I was riding in the car with a family friend. It was a treat for both adults and children to accompany him. I didn't want to go, but I was coerced into it. He came to a halt in a field and attempted to rape me while saying fundamental things the entire time. I confronted him. He became enraged and slammed the left side of my head into the dashboard. I was following an intensely bright light the next thing I knew. I was surrounded by darkness. My eyes were not bothered by the light. It was warm and loving. I wished I could be there, even though I didn't understand what was going on. I wanted to go. I was leaving my family and my beloved dog. My memory is hazy, but when I arrived, I remember people around me, despite the fact that no one I knew had died yet. These individuals were dressed in white robes. They were more alive than anyone I'd ever met before. They had bright lights, but my eyes were not like ours, and I could see things differently there. My eyes adapted to the light, much like when you walk out of a dark house into a bright day and your eyes adjust to the brightness. These 2 were head over heels in love. They revealed information to me. Some I didn't remember until later in life due to the molestation by the man's son and the brain injury I forgot about. I recalled burying the memory of the molestation. I was 10 at the time because I couldn't handle it. They told me I would never have children, but that I would come to terms with it. I'd always known I couldn't have kids. I had a hysterectomy before I ever had children. Our dogs and cats are like children to us. I realized in my late 30s that I would never be able to care for children because of the brain injury and residuals. I saw myself becoming successful and I wore glasses. I'd get glasses, which I did when I was 25. They said I'd have someone very special, a true love, to love me for the rest of my life. I'd always known I'd find that someone. I married my husband when I was 22 years old. We separated because of the molestation and my emotional issues, but we talked every day and spent every Saturday together. We remarried last year after everything worked out, and I've forgiven that man. We have that special love now more than ever. I don't recall them telling me this, but I've seen the future and events unfold. We used to live about a mile away from Interstate 97. There were numerous accidents on it. When they occurred, I would be aware. We used to take the long route home. I told my husband to take it easy. In this one spot, I felt panicked. The next day, I learned that a man had died at that location. Another time, I awoke depressed. The next day, I learned that a couple had been crushed but not killed by rocks falling from a hill 5 miles away. There are far too many to mention. I always knew that if I used this ability for my own benefit, I would lose it, and I never did. My annoyance is that it is never clear enough to forewarn anyone. They also predicted that I would be very successful professionally and do wonderful things for others. In my line of work, I'm just getting started. I served on the Colorado Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Board last year. I'm confident that I will do more for others. When my job situation improves, I intend to volunteer at Mother Teresa's hospice in town. I believe they told me more, but I'm not sure. They told me I had to return, even though I didn't want to. I wished to remain in that wonderful place where I could become like them and gain such wisdom. I knew it would be excruciatingly painful to return to my body, but I had no choice. I felt a pull on my entire body, and then I was back in my body like a zip. On the way back in, there was complete darkness. There isn't any distinction between here and there. They're present, but we cannot see them because we're too preoccupied with the physical world. I felt terrible, and my head hurt too much. I was extremely ill and vomiting. I felt dizzy. He was terrified and was praying. He was well aware that he'd murdered me. He was not afraid of me. His cows were more important than me. He was worried about how he would explain it and what would happen to him. It's wonderful to die. It doesn't hurt to die in any way. What hurts is returning to your body. Dying is not frightening. Being born into real life is the process of dying. We've come to love and learn from one another. That's the point. I want everyone to know that it is real there, even more so than it is here, and that what I said about dying and their message is true.